This was in 2007 and in the middle of summer. I live in Ronan, Montana on 10 acres with my family. On the weekend this happened, my wife and son had gone to a place called Fairmont Hot Springs, which is about 2 hours away from us, to meet up with her sister and her sister's kids. I had stayed home to finish some work around the property and get my truck fixed. On that Saturday, I had spent the entire day working my way down a list of things that needed to get done, and the last thing I needed to do before dark was to put a new fuel filter in my truck. I had it parked on the west side of our barn because I have a big shop light there that I was using, and my dog Duke was with me because he follows me everywhere when I'm working outside. I was halfway under the truck and had just started when Duke got up and started barking. It startled me enough that I slid back out to see what was going on, and I thought someone might be coming up the driveway, but when I stood up and looked around, there was nothing happening. I didn't think much of it at the time and figured he must have seen an animal, so I got back under the truck, but later I realized his barking had more significance. Not even a minute later and he was barking again. That time I didn't get up, I just yelled at him to knock it off and kept working. As soon as I had yelled at him, I heard him take off running toward the house, and I assumed it was an animal that he was now chasing. The second he ran off, there was a bright red glow that I could see around me, mostly on my legs and on the ground around the truck. This glow got really bright, and I was lying there wondering if something was going on with my shop light, but before I could really think much about it, I started to feel heat on my legs, and it immediately dawned on me that my barn was on fire. Right when I tried to pull myself back out from under the truck, my entire body felt like it suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I could still move slightly, but it took everything I had to barely lift my arms and legs off the ground. I guess the best way I can describe it is it felt like gravity got stronger and it was pulling me into the ground. The last thing I remember, and this is weird, was hearing something that sounded exactly like a jackhammer. Then I got lightheaded and put my head back in the dirt and completely blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was staring at dry grass and dirt right in front of my face. I didn't even know where I was at first because I was disoriented, kind of like when you wake up from being knocked out cold, but I realized I was lying on my side about 5 feet away from my truck and facing the barn. As I started to remember what I'd been doing before waking up in the grass, it didn't make any sense because I knew I was under the truck and on my back. I heard Duke's collar as I was getting up, and he walked right up to me like nothing had happened. At this point, I didn't have any memory of the red light or the heat on my legs. My explanation was that I had been working all day in the heat with not enough water and I had fainted, even though that really didn't add up. If I had passed out while I was under the truck, I couldn't understand how I'd ended up several feet away and facing in the opposite direction. Either way, I have a bit of a get-her-done attitude, and I still had to finish my work. So I went in the house, drank 2 full glasses of water and washed off my face, then went back outside to finish the truck and everything was normal. That night, the only other thing that happened was my wife called to check in and say goodnight. I did tell her about my fainting spell outside, but I downplayed it so she didn't worry about me. The next day was Sunday, and after church, the only thing I had to do was tidy up the house and take a mower tire in to get fixed before my wife and son got home. While I was in the kitchen cleaning, I got this instant sharp headache. It wasn't a regular one, it was a severe pressure, and it was accompanied by red flashes in my vision. I would be lying if I said it didn't scare me a little, but again, I had things to get done, and I told myself it was probably a symptom of getting so dehydrated the day before. It did shake me up a little, but it only lasted a minute, and then I got back to work. The exact same thing happened again a couple hours later. While I was sitting in my truck at Les Schwab, which is just a local tire shop in town, it was the same sharp headache with the same red flashes in my vision. I physically shook my head that time to make it go away, which actually seemed to work. Again, it did concern me a little, but not enough to do anything about it because it was short-lived like the first one. After my wife and son were home and we were in bed that night like usual, I had what I'm going to call a dream because I don't know what else to call it, but it was closer to a replay. In my dream, I was back under my truck and working on it alone, exactly like I had been that Saturday. I saw the red glow that I thought was a fire, and I felt the heat on my legs, and then I felt that immense pressure holding me down to the ground again. All of these details I had completely forgotten about before fainting. This replay went further though, and in the blink of an eye, I went from lying under my truck to sitting in a chair and communicating with something, but I didn't know what it was. I was shouting things out loud trying to find out what was going on, but I was only getting answers back in my mind, if that makes sense. I never saw anyone or anything. It was just me in a chair in what I suppose was a room, but I wasn't paying attention to it. Brace yourself, because this sounds crazy to most people, and it still does to me too, but after that I was given some information. First, I was told that I was randomly chosen and completely safe. Then I was told we are rare and important and something along the lines of an endangered species. I don't even know what to call it, but I got a strong sense that whoever this was cared about us. Not in some scientific way, it was more than that. It was like we were something precious and irreplaceable, and they actually wanted us to survive. Then my dream just ended with that, and I jerked awake and sat up in bed. I spent the early morning telling my wife everything that had actually happened while she was gone and what I experienced in the dream. Like I said, I think of it more like a replay than a dream because I had forgotten what happened to me under the truck, and when I replayed it in my mind that night, that's how I remembered. That was the last time anything happened. I never had another dream or headache or encounter of any kind. Of course, I have never forgotten it, and actually, it's been quite the opposite. The memories of what happened to me under the truck and everything that was told to me in that replay only got more vivid over time. I've had years to think it through, and I believe we are being watched. Not in a bad or threatening way at all, though. My feelings are that it's more like something out there is actually looking out for us and maybe even protecting us in certain ways. It really made me look at life differently. Not just having experienced all of it, but I find myself being a kinder person. Even down to finding a spider in the house and catching it to put it outside rather than killing it. I can't really explain it. I guess I just look at all life with a little more importance now. My story happened when I was only 6 years old, so I don't remember it myself, not clearly anyway, but my mom tells me the story, and every time she tells it, it gives me chills. She says it's the creepiest thing she's ever experienced, and I believe her. I had her write out every detail for me, and here's what happened. When I was young, my mom, my grandma, and I were staying at a family friend's beach house near Cape Cod. Specifically, it was a big oceanfront house on LeCount Hollow Beach in Wellfleet. I shared a bed and a bedroom with my mom, and in our room, we had a sliding glass door that went out to a balcony that overlooked the ocean. On our first night, my mom says I woke her up in the middle of the night and kept telling her there was a light show going on outside over the ocean. She didn't see anything and just assumed I was seeing people walking down to the beach at night with flashlights, and then just told me to go back to sleep, but I kept doing it. I guess I woke her up several more times that night saying the same thing. Every couple of hours, I would shake her and tell her the lights were back. By the early morning hours, I was telling her there were people outside and not just lights, and at that point, she was getting frustrated with me for keeping her up most of the night. With the threat of having to sleep in my own room if I kept waking her up, I finally stopped. The next day was a beach day, and my mom thought I was going to crash hard at bedtime because we had been out in the sun all day, but I didn't. Again, in the middle of the night, she says she woke up because my face was actually pressing against hers and she could feel me breathing on her. She jolted awake and asked me what I was doing, and I said that I needed a glass of milk and told her we had to go into the kitchen. After telling me to go back to sleep several times, she eventually decided to get up and get the milk, and I went with her. She got up, walked me into the kitchen, then poured a glass of milk and handed it to me. She says that as soon as I grabbed the milk, I told her I didn't actually want it. Extremely frustrated, she asked me why I had dragged her out of bed in the middle of the night to get milk, and I guess I told her I didn't want the milk, I just wanted us to get out of that bedroom. She was confused and annoyed and asked me why, and apparently, I told her that when I had seen the lights the night before, I didn't tell her everything. There was a little girl that had walked up to the sliding door, and I talked to her through the glass. I don't remember any of this, but my mom says I described the girl as about the same age as me, and I guess she tried to get me to come outside with her, but I told her no and I never opened the door. Then I told her the reason I wanted to leave the room and get milk was because the girl said she was going to come back and that they wanted to take both of us, whatever that meant. My mom says it was the single most chilling thing she has ever heard, especially because it was coming from a 6-year-old and in such a matter-of-fact way. I wasn't crying or really scared, I was just stating it like it was a normal factual thing. She didn't know what to say and didn't want to wake up my grandma, so we went to bed in one of the other bedrooms that night, and she said we could talk about it more in the morning. She does emphasize, though, that it was one of the most uncomfortable nights of her life, and both of us were tossing and turning. You'd think that would be the weirdest part, but it was actually what happened on our last day that sealed the deal for my mom. We were out on the beach in the morning before we had to leave, and the neighbors were out too. They were the owners of the house next door, and my grandma had known them for years. They had 2 kids who I was playing with, but at some point while the adults were all talking, my mom told them about my 2 nights of waking her up. That's when the man chimed in and said he was out on their back deck late that first night watching the ocean, and he saw lights too. He said he was positive they were not flashlights or boats or anything like that, and he watched them looping around out over the water not far from shore. They weren't moving like anything he'd seen before, and he thought of it as an actual UFO sighting. Up until that moment, my mom had basically written it all off as something I dreamt up or was imagining, but after her conversation with the neighbor, she says she knew something had actually happened. None of us have ever figured out what I saw that weekend, especially since so many years have gone by, but my mom still gets seriously freaked out when she thinks about me seeing a light show in the sky, then talking to a little girl on the other side of the sliding glass door in our bedroom in the middle of the night. And the fact that it freaks her out as much as it does, that's what really freaks me out. During the summer of 2012, I was staying in Sunriver with my mom, my stepdad, and a friend of mine. If you've never been to or heard of Sunriver, it's a small resort town in Central Oregon and is mostly known for the resort and its huge golf courses, nice houses, and Mount Bachelor nearby for skiing. But what I remember the most, and what I love the most, were the bike paths. There are endless, and I mean endless, winding bike trails through the whole area. They cut through trees, go over bridges and through tunnels, snake around houses on the golf course and the river, and even go into a little village-style shopping area. The coolest thing was that you could bike for actual hours without ever crossing a street or dealing with traffic. The only problem with Sunriver, though, is that it can be incredibly confusing, and it's easy to get lost and forget which way you need to go. There are maps occasionally, but it's still a complete maze out there with a dozen or more of these traffic circles that seem like they were put out of order on purpose. Circle 1 might take you to Circle 4, then Circle 7 says take a right to get to Circle 9, and so on. I'm going off of memory here, so those numbers could be totally wrong, but you get the point. Nothing there is in any kind of order, and that's why it's so easy to lose your way, and that's exactly what we did. One evening, my friend and I took off on our bikes and we were told to be back before dark. We fully intended on being back on time, but it got dark fast because it's heavily forested, and when it did, we were nowhere near the house. We also didn't realize that once the sun goes down in Sunriver, it gets really dark. There are no streetlights or bike path lights anywhere, at least there weren't back then. Other than the occasional rental house with the lights on inside, it was pitch black and we had no idea where we were going. We even had to walk our bikes because we could barely see the trail in front of us, and it really stopped being fun at that point. We were lost and getting worried, and knowing we were just two girls alone in the dark didn't help. Eventually, we found an open grassy area and just sat down for a minute to figure out what to do, and were looking up at the stars. We hadn't been sitting there for more than a few seconds when we both thought we saw a shooting star go across the sky. It was just a quick streak, but we caught the whole thing. Then we saw another, and then a third one, and within seconds there were 5 or 6 bright white points of light, and all of them were moving way too fast and sharply to be anything natural. Out loud, we both said the lights weren't falling, they were moving around, and not in a straight line either. They were looping around and making wide arcs and then snapping in 90-degree angles. I could see how a lot of people would think this was amazing and beautiful, but since we were out there alone and already worried about that, it went from strange to scary, and we both stood up and ran away with our bikes. We found the nearest house that had the lights on and banged on the door. I don't even remember what we said when the door opened, but it was probably something about being lost and seeing lights in the sky. But I do remember the man who answered was amazing, and he let us in right away. I think he could tell that we were really freaked out. His whole family was there, and they let us use a phone to call my mom. When she answered the phone, she had been panicking and thinking we were kidnapped or worse. We gave her the address of the house we were at so she could drive over to get us. While we were waiting for her to pick us up, we were explaining what we saw to these random people and how whatever was in the sky was not normal. They were all so interested in what we were saying that everyone in the house ended up going back outside to look. When we got out there, one of the lights was actually still there and still moving around erratically. I think there were 5 people in their family, plus the 2 of us, so all 7 of us saw and confirmed that it was real and we weren't crazy. That last single light ended up fading into the sky shortly after we went outside, but every person in that family saw it and watched it happen. When my mom finally got there to pick us up, we told her everything, and the whole family we were with confirmed what we had seen too, so at the very least she knew we weren't making it all up. After that, the rest of the trip was perfectly normal, and we got to leave with a great story. When we got home from that trip though, I started looking into sightings in that part of Oregon, and it turns out it's kind of a hot spot for strange reports. It's very remote and quiet, and there are government facilities and military bases scattered around the high desert areas. I've seen people write off sightings as meaningless or imaginary, but I don't think that's what this was. I personally don't believe they were extraterrestrial, but I do think they were classified. My gut tells me that what we saw was some kind of government testing, and that really makes sense to me because Oregon sure is remote enough for it.